Hello everyone, my name is Parker Brown, and today I'm going to be showing you how to raise a steel vessel through the use of heat. Before we begin, I want to give you a basic overview of what raising is and how it has been used by artisans in the past. Raising is a metalworking technique whereby sheet metal is formed into a bowl or other hollow object by repeated sequences of hammering the metal, thereby moving it into the desired shape. Considered an essential part of metalworking, among other uses, raising has been used for centuries in the creation of plate armor and other uses, both secular and sacred. For today's demonstration, I will be forming a piece of 16 gauge thick mild steel, similar to the piece that I'm holding here, into a bowl in preparation for the creation of a shield boss. Traditionally, when raising non-ferrous metals, such as copper, bronze, and brass, the metal would be softened through a process known as annealing, whereby the metal is heated and then quenched to allow the artisan to move the metal much more easily. However, since we will be raising with steel, we need something more aggressive than annealing if we are to overcome the material's natural lack of malleability. Instead, we will be hot working the steel at a temperature of around 2000 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot working plastically deforms the steel above its recrystallization temperature. For centuries, smiths have used a coal forge to do much of their hot work. Today, many artisans prefer the convenience and cleanliness offered by an oxyacetylene torch that has been fitted with a gas saver. The gas saver allows me to set the flow of oxygen and acetylene as I need it, and then by placing the torch on a hanging bar, the entire flow of gas is shut off. Then, when I need to relight the torch, I simply lift it off of the bar, allowing the gas to flow again and touch the torch to a pilot flame. This means that I don't have to readjust the torch every time. Before I start to raise, I have to determine the size of my finished bowl and the size of the blank disc of steel I will need to start out with. The size of the finished bowl is determined by the sketches I would do in the course of designing the piece. To determine what size of disc to start with, I will need to use a simple mathematical formula. The diameter of a disc for a raised bowl is as follows. The height of the finished bowl plus the width of the finished bowl plus 1 extra inch is equal to the overall diameter of the needed disc. Once I have measured and drawn the needed circle, I cut the disc out using a bevel shear. Steel is a very resilient material to cut. If you do not have a pair of bevel shears, you can also make do with a powerful electric jigsaw fitted with a metal cutting blade, or an electric bandsaw also fitted with a metal cutting blade. Regardless of your means of cutting out the disc, the edges need to be sanded to remove any burrs and to true up the shape of the disc. This will keep you from cutting yourself on the disc while handling it. Burrs can also act as channels through which buckling and cracking can develop in the piece as it is being worked. I prefer to use a large Stephen Bader industrial belt sander for this process, but a cheaper and more historical method is to use a file. It takes longer, but the results are just the same and help to ensure your work is done using a high level of detail and craftsmanship. Prior to raising, I prefer to lightly sink the steel disc. This gets the form started along the direction that I want the metal to take in the raising process. Steel is a resilient material and requires a lot of force to move cold. I am using a 4-pound rawhide mallet and a cast iron sinking form to sink this disc. Whenever a piece of metal is sunk, it thins it somewhat because the metal is being stretched. I am careful to sink starting from the outside and moving inward to help reduce the amount of stretching placed on the center of the form, where the metal is moved the most. Now that the disc has been sunk, we are ready to start raising. I like to draw out my raising courses before I begin. I do this with a pair of calipers and a piece of soapstone. Now, unlike ink or pencil, soapstone doesn't burn away as quickly when heat is applied to the steel, thus allowing me to be able to see where I need to lay my blows for the most effect. I like to draw my courses approximately a ½ inch apart. I start from the center and draw the courses using a compass first with a Sharpie marker. I then use the soapstone and retrace over the marks made with the Sharpie. It's a somewhat painstaking process, but it greatly aids in keeping the metal moving in the direction necessary. Half of the work in raising is in the planning of the metal as you work it. Once my marks are drawn, I'm ready to start raising. Now for this project, I'm choosing to raise over a ball stake, given the simple nature of the final formed shape. Now for other projects, you might want to consider using a T-stake, or even both, depending upon the needs of the project. Regardless of which stake you are using, you want to make sure that you use only dedicated stakes for working your steel. You do not want the remnants of your hot worked steel to get worked into your other metals, such as copper or silver. This can result in contaminated metals that are embedded with discoloration from other previously worked metals. Hot raising steel has several inherent dangers, and proper safety precautions must be taken. When working, you need to wear proper hearing protection, as well as using a face shield, apron, and gloves to protect yourself from the heat of the torch and your work. When handling the hot steel, I prefer to use vise grips to handle the piece along the surface of the stake. Keep in mind that proper safety equipment includes an intelligent choice in clothing. Long pants, preferably blue jeans, and closed-toed shoes will help keep you from being burned by falling bits of hot metal that come off the piece as you are working it. Make sure that your work area is on a non-flammable surface, such as concrete, and that your work area has as much ventilation as possible. Once all the proper precautions have been taken, we are ready to begin raising. Raising begins at the center of the piece and moves out radially to the edge. The objective is to move the piece gradually into the desired shape along the surface of the stake. The vessel is worked from the outside over the stake using a raising hammer, which has a wide, rounded face. Raising is done in a series of courses alternating in direction from clockwise to counterclockwise. This helps to ensure that the piece does not warp. The piece is held at about a 30-degree angle with the hammer falling so that the handle is parallel with the floor. The objective is not to pinch the metal between the hammer and the stake's surface, but to hit just past where the metal touches the stake, thus pushing the metal onto the form. As the hammer falls in even blows, the disc is rotated. After going around the bowl once, move the disc back about ½ inch and continue raising. The careful preparation of your marks will help to ensure that you are moving the metal where it needs to go. Progress from the center of the bowl to the top edge is called a course and consists of concentric circles. After each course, you will need to redraw these circles onto your piece using the aforementioned soapstone and compass. Remember that as you are raising, the edge of the bowl has to move a lot more than the metal at the center. Because of this, it's possible to accidentally create a wasted funnel shape, like this. To prevent it, strike more gently near the center of the bowl while taking special care near the top edge. If the bowl becomes too flared out, raise a course or two starting at mid-height. Continue the raising process, checking periodically to make sure that the form is moving in the direction that you need. Check often so that if a problem arises, it can be fixed before it's too late. Remember that raising is not an instantaneous process, but requires patience and steady work to complete. This series of pictures represents the gradual process of 5 hours of work. But do not despair. With steady work, you will get your piece to the desired finished shape. In order for the bowl to have a more regular appearance, we must planish it. This requires going over the entire surface of the bowl with a polished hammer, striking it in a tight, regulated manner that smooths out all of the irregularities on the piece's surface. Before planishing, I redraw my concentric lines to help guide me. My objective is to remove imperfections on the surface by hammering the piece using repeated, relatively soft blows. I am not trying to move the steel as much as I was when I was raising, so I perform this portion of the process cold. With the piece planished, I now have a variety of options as to how I want to finish it. In the case of this piece, I will continue to work the edges back over, sand it, and polish it in preparation for joining to other components to make a fencing buckler for martial arts use. I hope you've enjoyed this demonstration of hot raising, and I wish you the best of luck and safety in all of your metalsmithing projects.